Welcome, wanderers of the wasteland. Today, we're exploring the darkest timeline in Fallout history, where the Enclave succeeded in deploying FEV Curling-13 and won their war against mutation. This isn't just another what-if scenario. This is a confession from the last human on Earth, documenting how the Enclave's vision of genetic purity led to the extinction of humanity itself. When President Richardson released 250,000 gallons of weaponized FEV into the jet streams, he didn't just kill raiders and mutants, he murdered everyone, including the Enclave's own future. You're about to hear how victory became extinction, how purity became poison, and how the wasteland's greatest threat wasn't radiation or monsters, but the people who claim to be saving America. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. My name is Dr. Marcus Whitfield, former Lieutenant Colonel, Chemical Corps, Control Station Enclave, serial number 4471 Echo. If you're hearing this recording, then you found one of the few places on Earth where the truth still exists. The real truth about what happened when we won, when the Enclave achieved total victory over the wasteland in 2242. When we released FEV Curling-13 into the atmosphere and watched the world die for the second time. I helped make it happen. God forgive me. I stood in that laboratory next to Charles Curling and celebrated when the final batch of toxin reached maturity. 250,000 gallons of death, refined to perfection. We called it the Project, such a clean name for genocide. I watched President Richardson give the order with tears of joy in his eyes. He called it humanity's salvation. The restoration of America, the dawn of a new age. He was wrong about everything except the last part. It was definitely a new age, just not the one we expected. You need to understand something about life on the oil rig before I tell you what happened next. We lived in a bubble of pre-war nostalgia, sealed away from radiation and mutation since the bombs fell in 2077. 165 years of isolation breeds a special kind of madness. We ate processed meals in sterile cafeterias while memorizing the Pledge of Allegiance. We wore those blue and yellow jumpsuits like religious vestments. Every child born on that rig learned 3 fundamental truths before they could walk. America never died. We were the real government. Everyone else was a mutant that needed to be cleansed. The propaganda was so thick, you could taste it in the recycled air. Every screen showed endless loops of pre-war America at its peak. White picket fences, baseball games, apple pie cooling on windowsills, children playing in green grass under blue skies. They never showed us the resource wars, never mentioned how Poseidon Energy and the other corporations bled the world dry, never explained why we had contingency plans for nuclear war 20 years before the first bomb fell. The Enclave didn't just survive the apocalypse, we orchestrated parts of it, but I didn't learn that until much later. Until after we had already won, I was recruited into the Chemical Corps at 19. Top scores in biological sciences. My grandfather had been one of the original oil rig personnel, so my bloodline was considered pure. That mattered more than talent in our world. Genetic purity was everything. We tested our blood monthly, checking for any signs of mutation or contamination. Even the slightest deviation meant exile to the wasteland, though we all knew exile was just another word for execution. Nobody survived out there, or so we told ourselves. Dr. Curling became my mentor in 2236. He was brilliant in the way that dangerous men often are, single-minded, utterly convinced of his righteousness. He spoke about FEV the way priests speak about salvation. The forced evolutionary virus was our key to reclaiming America, not the original strain that created super mutants. No, we had something better, something we pulled from the ruins of Mariposa after our scouts found it crawling with abominations. We spent 6 years perfecting the formula. 6 years of testing on captured wastelanders and vault dwellers. The detention level of the rig became our laboratory. I still remember the first successful test. Subject was a trader from New Reno, caught by our patrols near Navarro. Healthy male, approximately 30 years old. Minimal radiation exposure by wasteland standards. We introduced him to the FEV aerosol at 1400 hours. By 1430 he was coughing blood. By 1500 his DNA was unraveling at the cellular level. By 1600 there was nothing left but organic sludge. Curling called it a breakthrough. Richardson called it progress. I called it Tuesday. The worst part was how methodical we were about it. Every death carefully documented. Every scream recorded for analysis. We had charts showing optimal dispersal patterns, maps indicating jet stream velocities, timetables for global saturation. The math was beautiful if you could ignore what it represented. Complete extinction of every human being on Earth who carried even the slightest genetic deviation from the pre-war baseline. That included everyone born outside a vault or the Enclave. 99.9% of humanity, reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. Vice President Byrd volunteered to test the antidote. That should have been our first warning sign. The man was already brain damaged from a previous experiment, but Richardson kept him around as a symbol of patriotic sacrifice. The antidote worked, but it didn't matter. We had already inoculated all Enclave personnel months before the release date. Every soldier, scientist, and citizen on the rig had immunity. We were Noah's Ark in a sea of poison we created ourselves. I need you to understand the scale of what we planned. This wasn't just about killing raiders or super mutants. We weren't just targeting ghouls or the obviously mutated. Every single person living in the wasteland had trace amounts of radiation in their DNA. Generations of exposure, passed down from parent to child. They looked human. They acted human. They were human in every way that mattered except to us. But the Enclave had decided they were genetic deviants, mutants wearing human faces, impediments to American restoration. The new California Republic had over 700,000 citizens by 2242. 700,000 people trying to rebuild democracy from the ashes. They had schools, hospitals, elected governments, children playing in the streets of Shady Sands. Farmers growing crops in radiated soil, making life bloom where it shouldn't. We classified them all as acceptable losses. The Brotherhood of Steel with their technology and warrior culture, trying to prevent another apocalypse, targets for elimination, Vault-13, and its peaceful inhabitants who had lived underground since the bombs, keeping humanity's best traditions alive. We kidnapped them for testing, then marked them for death. Even our own soldiers didn't fully grasp what we were doing. Most of the military personnel thought we were deploying a targeted bioweapon against obvious mutants. They pictured super mutants and centaurs dissolving in the streets. They didn't realize their own families would die if they had spent even a day outside the oil rig without protection. The propaganda was that effective. We had convinced ourselves that genetic purity was the only measure of humanity that mattered. Frank Horrigan was our enforcer in those final days. Secret Service agent turned into something that shouldn't exist. 10 feet of augmented muscle and cybernetics, pumped full of modified FEV that somehow made him stronger instead of killing him. The irony of using a mutant to protect our anti-mutant agenda was lost on Richardson. Or maybe he just didn't care. Horrigan was a tool, nothing more. A very effective tool that kept everyone in line through fear. I watched him execute a squad of our own soldiers once. They had questioned the morality of kidnapping vault dwellers for experimentation. Horrigan didn't even use his weapons. Just grabbed them one by one and squeezed until things broke. The screaming lasted 30 seconds. The memory lasts forever. After that, nobody questioned orders. We all became complicit through silence. The Poseidon oil rig was our entire world. 3 square miles of steel and concrete rising from the Pacific. Most people never left the central platform. They lived their entire lives in climate-controlled rooms, breathing recycled air, eating processed food, dreaming of an America that died before they were born. The lucky ones worked in the reactor level or the barracks. The unlucky ones ended up in research division with people like me. We wore white lab coats over our jumpsuits like armor against conscience. The presidential level was paradise compared to the rest. Richardson had a full office suite decorated with pre-war artifacts. American flags that had never seen radiation. A desk made from actual wood. Pictures of presidents who would have shot him for treason if they knew what he planned. His secretary sat outside, eternally cheerful, as if scheduling genocide was the same as arranging lunch meetings. Vice President Byrd would wander the halls, spouting random trivia with his damaged brain. A living reminder of what happened when you served the Enclave too well. You have to understand the psychology of it. We genuinely believed we were heroes. Every morning, we recited the pledge. Every night, we sang the anthem. In between, we planned the systematic extermination of our own species. The cognitive dissonance should have broken us, but ideology is a powerful drug. We had spent generations convincing ourselves that wastelanders weren't really human, that their mutations, however minor, made them less than us, that America couldn't be restored until they were gone. The children were the worst part. Enclave children grew up viewing the wasteland through monitors and reports. They saw raiders attacking caravans, super mutants eating people, ghouls shambling through ruins, but they never saw the families in Shady Sands teaching their kids to read. Never witnessed the communities working together to survive. Never understood that mutation didn't mean monster. We raised generations of citizens who could watch a child die from FEV exposure and feel nothing but satisfaction at another mutant eliminated. Our scientists were brilliant monsters. Besides Curling and myself, we had dozens of researchers working on the project, each one convinced they were saving humanity. Dr. Klein focused on dispersal patterns. Dr. Carlson perfected the bonding proteins that would make the virus unstable after achieving global saturation. Dr. Patel ensured it would only affect human DNA, leaving plants and animals untouched. We were so proud of that last part. We weren't destroying the world, we told ourselves. Just the mutants infesting it. The military structure kept us disciplined. Colonel Autumn's predecessor ran the armed forces with brutal efficiency. Sergeant Granite commanded the ground troops with unwavering loyalty. Every soldier was indoctrinated from birth, trained to follow orders without question. They performed drills in power armor, preparing to reclaim the mainland after the cleansing. Not one of them stopped to ask what gave us the right to decide who was human enough to live. The detention level haunts me most. Hundreds of cages filled with test subjects, Vault-13 residents who thought they were being rescued, tribal villagers who had never seen technology beyond spears, wastelanders whose only crime was existing with trace radiation in their blood. We kept them like livestock, feeding them just enough to keep them alive for testing. Some begged, some prayed, some just stared at us with eyes that asked a question we couldn't answer. Why? I remember one little girl from Arroyo, maybe 8 years old, dark hair, bright eyes, kept asking when she could go home to her grandmother. We logged her as subject 247B. The B stood for baseline. She had minimal mutations, would have lived a full life in the wasteland. Instead, she became a data point in our research. When we tested batch 17 of Curling-13 on her cell block, she lasted 12 minutes, longer than most. I recorded her time of death with steady hands and went to lunch 20 minutes later. The Chosen One changed everything. We had reports of someone from Arroyo searching for their kidnapped people, following the trail from village to vault to us. Richardson wasn't concerned. Who could possibly threaten the Enclave? We had technology, weapons, an entire ocean between us and any threat. But we underestimated human determination. We always did. In our timeline, the original timeline that you probably read about in old records if any still exist, the Chosen One reached us, infiltrated the rig, convinced Curling that wastelanders were still human, turned our own weapon against us by releasing FEV into our ventilation system, destroyed the rig's reactor and escaped while we burned in nuclear fire. The Enclave's dream died with Richardson, and the wasteland survived to build a better world. But that's not what happened in my timeline. In my world, we stopped the Chosen One at Navarro. Horrigan caught them trying to steal vertibird plans and tore them apart in front of their companions. Without their leader, the tribal rescue party scattered. Nobody reached the oil rig. Nobody confronted Richardson. Nobody saved the world from us. March 23rd, 2242. The day humanity ended. Curling and I stood in the release chamber with 50 other scientists and military personnel. 250,000 gallons of FEV Curling-13 in pressurized tanks, connected to aerial dispersal systems. The jet streams would carry our poison across the planet in 14 days. Total global saturation in less than 3 weeks. The math was perfect. The plan was flawless. The countdown reached 0. Richardson gave the order personally, his voice crackling over the intercom. Today, we reclaim our birthright. Today, America rises from the ashes. Today, humanity's true inheritors take their place in history. Release the agent. What do you think really happened here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to know if I'm the only one who feels this way. Curling turned the valve himself. I watched the pressure gauges drop as ton after ton of death flowed into the release chambers. The dispersal jets fired, sending invisible clouds of FEV into the upper atmosphere. We couldn't see it from the rig, but we knew what was happening. The wind would carry our gift eastward first. California would die in hours, Nevada in days. The entire continent in a week. We celebrated that night. Champagne hoarded since before the war. Real food from our emergency supplies. Richardson gave a speech about manifest destiny and American exceptionalism. Soldiers sang patriotic songs. Scientists congratulated each other on making history. I stood on the observation deck, watching the sunset paint the Pacific red, and tried not to think about how many people would never see another dawn. The first reports came in 3 days later. Navarro had found bodies throughout Northern California, settlements empty except for organic residue that used to be people. New Reno's casinos filled with dissolving corpses. The hub's traders melted in their stalls. Shady Sands, capital of the NCR, population 200,000, reduced to empty streets covered in biological waste. The virus worked exactly as designed. Every human with mutated DNA died in agony while we monitored from safety. The Brotherhood of Steel held out for 6 days. Their power armor provided some protection, filtering the air, buying them time. But FEV Curling-13 was designed to persist. It clung to surfaces, saturated water supplies, invaded every sealed environment. We monitored their communications as they realized what was happening. Elder Maxon's last transmission still echoes in my head. To anyone listening, the Enclave has murdered the world. Remember us. Remember what they did. Remember that we tried to stop them. They didn't try hard enough. Nobody did. By day 7, every Brotherhood bunker from Lost Hills to the Mojave had gone silent. Thousands of years of preserved technology and knowledge, protected by warriors who dedicated their lives to preventing another apocalypse, meant nothing against an invisible killer designed by American patriots. We logged their elimination as a strategic success, another obstacle to restoration removed. The super mutants lasted longest, ironically. Their FEV-altered biology provided partial resistance, turning what should have been instant death into weeks of deterioration. We hadn't accounted for that in our models. Watching them slowly dissolve from the inside out wasn't part of the plan. Marcus, the sheriff of Broken Hills, who had helped humans and mutants coexist peacefully, transmitted for 9 days before his voice finally faded. He spent those days describing what we had done, documenting the death of everyone he tried to protect. His last words were simply, "You are not human." He was wrong, of course. We were the only true humans left. That's what we told ourselves as report after report confirmed total wasteland depopulation. Vault 15 empty. Vault City, which had thrived on the surface for decades, silent. Gecko's nuclear plant running on automatic with no ghouls left to maintain it. Every settlement, every town, every hint of civilization that had grown from the ashes, erased in under 2 weeks. The vaults were an unexpected complication. The sealed ones, the control vaults that were never meant to be experiments, they survived initially. Clean air recycling, purified water, no exposure to the outside world. But vaults need supplies eventually. They need to trade, to expand, to let people in and out. One by one, they opened their doors to investigate the silence. One by one, they died. Vault 8, Vault 3, Vault 21. All the success stories of nuclear survival eliminated by their curiosity about why the wasteland had gone quiet. Richardson called it divine providence, God clearing the path for America's restoration. He stood in the command center, watching dots disappear from our continental map, and wept with joy. Each dot represented thousands of people, but to him, they were just infections being cured, mutations being corrected, obstacles being removed. I stood beside him, part of his inner circle now, a reward for my role in perfecting the virus. I watched him celebrate genocide and said nothing. 2 weeks after release, the silence began. No more radio transmissions from the mainland. No more desperate pleas for help. No more accusations of mass murder. Just the sound of wind blowing through empty cities. Automated systems continued functioning. Robot servants wandering streets filled with biological sludge that used to be their owners. Mr. Handy units still cheerfully offering assistance to customers who would never come. Protectrons guarding stores that would never reopen. We waited 3 months before sending the first reconnaissance teams. Full environmental suits, military escort, vertibirds flying low over the California coast. They found exactly what we expected. Cities empty except for the residue. Buildings intact but lifeless. Infrastructure ready for reclamation. The perfect blank slate for rebuilding America. The teams reported no survivors, no resistance, no signs of human life. Mission accomplished. I was part of the 5th reconnaissance team assigned to survey New California Republic territory. Richardson wanted scientists on the ground, confirming the virus had worked as intended. What I saw there changed me. Not the death, we expected that, but the life interrupted. Children's toys abandoned in playgrounds. Schools with lessons still written on blackboards. Homes with meals half-eaten on tables. Their owners reduced to stains on kitchen floors. We had killed them in the middle of living, of building, of becoming something better than what came before. Shady Sands was the worst. The NCR had built something beautiful there, a functioning democracy rising from nuclear ash. Their Congress building stood empty, laws half debated, votes never cast. The presidential mansion where Tandy had governed for 50 years, bringing peace and prosperity to the wasteland, now housed only shadows and silence. In the city square, they had been building a monument to cooperation between humans, ghouls, and super mutants. The foundation was complete. It would never be finished. I found a school and went inside alone, against protocol. The classroom walls were covered with children's drawings, crayon pictures of families, homes, two-headed Brahmin that were pets instead of mutants. One drawing showed a little girl holding hands with her parents under a caption that read, "My family survives together." The irony cut deeper than any knife. They had survived nuclear war, radiation, raiders, and monsters. They couldn't survive us. The virus had worked too well. Bodies exposed to concentrated doses didn't just die, they liquefied. Complete cellular breakdown, leaving only organic slurry that seeped into the ground. In places where people had gathered, trying to help each other as the symptoms began, the floors were covered inches deep in what used to be human beings. The smell was indescribable. Sweet rot mixed with chemical decay. It clung to our environmental suits, followed us back to the vertebrates. Some of the soldiers vomited in their helmets. We catalogued everything with scientific precision. Death rates, dispersal patterns, viral persistence in different environments. The data confirmed total success. Not a single human settlement showed signs of life. The few vaults that remained sealed were marked for later attention. We would either recruit them or eliminate them, depending on their genetic purity and willingness to accept Enclave authority. There would be no tolerance for deviation in our new America. Back on the oil rig, construction began immediately. Prefabricated buildings ready for deployment. Infrastructure packages designed before the war, updated for post-nuclear conditions. We would start with California, establish a foothold, then expand eastward. The new capital would be built on the ruins of Shady Sands, a symbolic victory over the NCR's failed democracy. Richardson already had the plans drawn up. Wide boulevards, government buildings, monuments to Enclave heroes who made it all possible. The first colonization wave launched 6 months after the cleansing. 5,000 Enclave citizens, eager to claim their promised land. They flew to the mainland in armored vertibirds, power armor squads securing landing zones, construction crews immediately beginning work. I watched them from the rig's observation deck, a steady stream of aircraft carrying our people to their new empire. They looked like locusts descending on a corpse. The colonists were divided into specialized groups. Agricultural teams would restart farming using pre-war seeds and purified soil. Engineering crews would restore power grids and water systems. Military units would establish bases and patrol routes. Administrative personnel would create governmental structures. Everyone had a role in rebuilding America. Everyone, except the millions we had murdered to make room. Reports from the colonies were initially positive. Resources were abundant with no competition for them. Pre-war ruins could be salvaged without resistance. Automated factories could be restarted, producing goods for Enclave use. The colonists sent back messages of triumph and progress. They were walking through empty cities like gods surveying their domain, choosing what to preserve and what to demolish. The wasteland's attempts at civilization were mostly scheduled for removal. We would build better, cleaner, more American, but something was wrong. I noticed it in the data before anyone else. Colonists were reporting illness, minor at first, attributed to adjustment from the oil rig's controlled environment. Headaches, nausea, fatigue, standard symptoms of adapting to mainland conditions. But they persisted. They worsened. Medical teams found nothing wrong. Blood tests showed no contamination. Genetic screening confirmed purity. Yet people kept getting sicker. It started with the children. They had never left the oil rig before, never breathed air that wasn't filtered and recycled. Their immune systems, protected for generations, had no experience with the mainland's background radiation. Not enough to cause mutations, we had made sure of that, but enough to make them weak. Constant low-level exposure their bodies couldn't process. Children who should have been playing in their new homeland were confined to medical wards. Then came the psychological effects. Colonists reported nightmares, all variations of the same theme. Cities full of people melting into puddles while asking why. Voices in the wind calling out names of the dead. Shadows moving in empty buildings. The medical staff diagnosed stress reactions, prescribed sedatives, and reminded everyone they were heroes reclaiming America. But the nightmares spread faster than any virus. Suicide rates spiked after month 3. Colonists would leave notes apologizing to people who no longer existed. One engineer threw himself from the highest building in New Reno after spending a day cataloging the casino's security recordings. He had watched thousands of people die in real time, their final moments preserved in digital clarity. His note said simply, "They were just trying to live." Richardson had the recordings destroyed, and the engineer's death classified as an industrial accident. The mainland was too quiet. That's what really broke people. No birds sang, we had expected them to survive. But they had eaten contaminated insects and died. No dogs barked, they had consumed infected prey. No insects buzzed. The FEV had been too effective, spreading through the food chain in ways we hadn't modeled. The only sounds were wind, our own voices, and the endless creaking of empty buildings. The silence was louder than any scream. Automated systems became our companions and our horror. Robots programmed with personality subroutines continued their cheerful service. A Mr. Handy in Shady Sands welcomed colonists every morning with "Good day, neighbors." Isn't it wonderful to be alive? Nobody had the heart to shut it down. It was the only thing that sounded happy anymore. But at night, those same robots would perform their routines for customers who would never return. And the colonists would lie awake listening to mechanical voices talking to ghosts. The Enclave military maintained discipline through increasingly harsh measures. Sergeant Granite, who had seemed so loyal, began questioning orders. He had led a patrol through Vault-15 and found the bodies of children who had survived nuclear war only to die from our virus. He asked Richardson directly, "Sir, how were these Vault dwellers any different from us?" He was executed for sedition. His squad was reassigned. The questions didn't stop. I continued my research, now focused on the virus's long-term effects. What I discovered terrified me more than the genocide itself. FEV Curling-13 wasn't breaking down as designed. It was persisting in the environment, bonding with background radiation, creating new compounds we hadn't predicted. The mainland wasn't just empty, it was becoming toxic to human life. Even Enclave citizens with their inoculations were showing cellular damage after prolonged exposure. The pregnancy failures started 8 months into colonization. Every single one. Women who had been healthy on the oil rig couldn't carry children to term on the mainland. The few babies born alive had deformities, mutations, the very thing we had tried to eliminate. Our pure genetics were being corrupted by the poisoned world we created. Richardson ordered the medical data classified. The colonists weren't told why their children were dying. Plants grew wrong in the contaminated soil. Crops planted with pre-war seeds produced twisted vegetables. Fruits that looked normal but contained toxins. The agricultural teams tried everything. Soil purification, hydroponics, greenhouse isolation. Nothing worked. The FEV had fundamentally altered the chemistry of life itself. We could occupy the mainland, but we couldn't truly live there. Not without becoming the very mutants we had exterminated. Wildlife that survived began changing rapidly. Radroaches grew larger, more aggressive. Mole rats developed pack-hunting behaviors they had never shown before. Deathclaws, already dangerous, became something worse. They seemed to sense what we had done, targeting Enclave patrols specifically, ignoring easier prey to hunt power-armored soldiers. Nature itself was rejecting our presence. Year 1 ended with a third of the colonists requesting return to the oil rig. Richardson denied every request. We had committed to mainland restoration. Retreat was betrayal. Families were separated when some members couldn't handle the psychological strain. Children begged to go home. Soldiers deserted, walking into the wasteland rather than continuing to serve. Most were never found. The few recovered had removed their armor and weapons, choosing death over duty. If you've ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I'll be reading them. The expansion continued despite mounting problems. We established outposts further inland. Each one reported the same issues. Empty cities full of ghosts, toxic environment that slowly poisoned even the protected, colonists breaking under the weight of absolute silence. We pushed into Nevada, Utah, Colorado. Everywhere we went, we found death we had caused and land we couldn't truly claim. The Mojave was particularly disturbing. New Vegas stood empty, its neon lights still flashing for customers who would never come. The Strip's casinos ran on automatic, robots dealing cards to empty tables, slot machines singing their electronic songs to nobody. We set up a command post in the Lucky 38, Robert House's former stronghold. His body was still in its life support pod, the machinery having failed when his human operators dissolved. Even preserved for centuries, he had enough humanity in his DNA to die from our virus. But it was the dam that showed us the true scope of our mistake. Hoover Dam, one of the greatest pre-war engineering achievements, still functional after 2 centuries. The NCR and Legion had fought for years to control it, understanding its strategic importance. Now it belonged to us by default, but we couldn't operate it properly. The systems required more personnel than we could spare. Power that should have lit our new civilization flickered and failed. We had inherited infrastructure designed for millions, but we only numbered in the thousands. Water became another unexpected problem. Rivers and lakes were contaminated with FEV runoff. The virus bound with minerals in the water, creating compounds that our purification systems couldn't fully remove. Colonists developed chronic illnesses despite drinking only processed water. The inoculation protected against the original virus, but not these new variations. We were slowly poisoning ourselves with every sip. Food supplies dwindled as hunting became impossible and farming failed. The oil rigs' reserves wouldn't last forever. Plans to live off the mainland's resources crumbled against the reality of a poisoned world. We had destroyed the ecosystem so thoroughly that it couldn't support human life. Even our supposedly pure version. The very air was becoming hostile, requiring constant filtration that our equipment couldn't maintain indefinitely. Richardson's responses grew increasingly detached from reality. He ordered monuments built while colonists sickened. He planned cities while outposts failed. He gave speeches about American renewal while standing in graveyards of our own making. The inner circle, myself included, watched our leader descend into delusion rather than accept what we had done. We had destroyed the world to save it, and in doing so, had doomed ourselves. The second year brought mutations among our own people, not the obvious kind we had murdered millions to prevent, but subtle changes, cellular degradation, organ failures, cancers that shouldn't exist in genetically pure humans. Children born on the mainland developed breathing problems, their lungs unable to process even filtered air properly. Our doctors worked frantically to understand what was happening, but the truth was simple. We had created a world so hostile to human life that even we couldn't survive it. I submitted report after report to Richardson, documenting the environmental toxicity, the fertility crisis, the psychological collapse of our colonists. He responded by classifying my research and promoting me to Senior Director of Mainland Development, a title that meant nothing in a world where development was impossible. He ordered me to find solutions, not problems, to make the data fit our vision rather than accept that our vision had been fundamentally flawed. The oil rig became a prison nobody wanted to leave or return to. Those still stationed there lived in denial, reading sanitized reports of mainland progress. Those on the mainland begged to return, but weren't allowed, trapped in a continental graveyard they had helped create. Communication between the two groups broke down as neither could accept the other's reality. We had split into two enclaves, one dying of illusion, the other of truth. Desertions increased despite summary executions for attempted abandonment. Entire squads would vanish on patrol, leaving their power armor behind like molted shells. Some probably died immediately from FEV exposure without their protection. Others might have found sealed vaults or underground shelters, choosing uncertain survival over certain madness. We never searched for them. What was the point? Where would they go in a world we had emptied? I remember the day we found the Garden of Eden creation kit in Vault 87. The GEC, the miraculous terraforming device that could have rebuilt the wasteland without genocide. It had been there all along, waiting to transform dead Earth into living paradise. The vault itself was a horror show of FEV experiments, but the GEC was pristine, ready to create new life from radiation and ruin. We could have used it, should have used it. Instead, we had chosen extinction. Richardson ordered the GEC destroyed. He said it was contaminated technology, designed for mutants, incompatible with pure human genetics. The real reason was simpler. Its existence proved we had chosen the wrong path. There had been other ways to reclaim America, ways that didn't require mass murder. The GEC represented the future we had killed to preserve our past. Watching it melt in plasma fire was like watching hope itself die. The third year brought the first Enclave mutations, not from radiation or external contamination, but from the FEV itself. Our inoculation was breaking down, reacting with trace amounts of virus in the environment, altering our DNA in ways we couldn't predict or prevent. A soldier's eyes changed color overnight. A scientist developed a sixth finger. A child was born with scales instead of skin. We had become the very thing we had tried to eliminate. The executions began immediately. Anyone showing signs of mutation was terminated, their bodies burned, their names erased from records. Families turned on each other, reporting suspicious changes, real or imagined. Parents murdered children who developed differently. Spouses betrayed partners whose genetics shifted. The genetic purity we had killed for became a curse that consumed us from within. I was tasked with finding a cure, a new inoculation, anything to stop the mutations. My laboratory on the mainland became a desperate race against biological inevitability. Every test failed. Every formula made things worse. The FEV had evolved beyond our control, combining with radiation and environmental toxins to create something entirely new. We hadn't cleansed the world of mutation. We had created the perfect conditions for it to flourish. The Vault dweller populations we had marked for recruitment never materialized. Every vault we opened was either empty, their inhabitants having emerged and died years ago, or filled with corpses from when their systems finally failed. Vault 101 remained sealed, its overseer refusing all communication. Vault 111 was full of frozen colonists who thawed into sludge when we tried to wake them, the FEV having penetrated even cryogenic preservation. Vault 81 had developed its own diseases that killed our contact team within hours. We tried to recruit from Vault 76, which had opened on schedule decades before, but its dwellers had spread across Appalachia, building communities, trading posts, small towns, all empty now, all dissolved by our virus. Their vault stood as a monument to what could have been. Successful recolonization without genocide, peaceful expansion, cooperation instead of extermination. Everything we had rejected in favor of purity. The psychological breaks became epidemic. A nurse in New Vegas spent her days setting tables in casino restaurants, placing dishes for customers she insisted were just late. An engineer in Shady Sands built playground equipment in the town square every night, tearing it down every morning. Trapped in a loop of creating for children who would never play. A soldier walked the streets of the hub calling out merchant prices he had read in old logs, becoming the market he had helped destroy. Richardson's inner circle started fragmenting. Vice President Byrd, already brain damaged, began moments of terrible clarity where he would scream about the murder we had committed before relapsing into his damaged state. Dr. Curling hadn't spoken in 6 months, just stared at his data terminals showing successful viral deployment. Other advisors disappeared, either fleeing to the mainland or taking their own lives rather than face what we had done. I found Curling's body in his lab on the anniversary of the release. 3 years to the day since we had deployed FEV Curling-13, he had injected himself with a concentrated dose of the original virus, the kind that created super mutants. His suicide note was one line: "Perhaps monsters deserve to become monsters." His transformation was incomplete when I found him, stuck between human and mutant, a metaphor for what we had all become. The 4th year saw the first generation of mainland-born Enclave children reach cognition. They had never known the oil rig, never breathed filtered air, never lived without the weight of absolute silence. They didn't sing patriotic songs or recite the pledge. They barely spoke at all. When they did, they asked questions we couldn't answer. Why is everyone gone? Did we make them go away? Are we the bad people? Their parents told them about American greatness while standing in the ruins of America's attempt to rebuild itself. Agricultural failure became total. Nothing would grow properly in the poisoned soil. Hydroponics failed from contaminated water. Greenhouses couldn't maintain sterile environments. We had destroyed the fundamental ability of Earth to support human life. The pre-war seeds we had hoarded produced only twisted mockeries of food. Livestock brought from the rig died within months, their offspring born wrong, if born at all. We were starving in a world we had emptied to feast in. The power armor started failing. Maintenance required resources we couldn't produce. Manufacturing facilities stood empty, their automated systems breaking down without human oversight. We had inherited the wasteland's infrastructure, but lacked the population to maintain it. Every suit that broke was irreplaceable. Every weapon that jammed might never fire again. We were becoming primitives with advanced technology we couldn't sustain. Raiders would have been a mercy, but there were no raiders. No enemies to fight. No external threat to unite us. Just the slow dissolution of everything we had built. Some colonists formed mock raider gangs, attacking each other for supplies nobody needed, playing out conflicts that gave their existence meaning. Richardson condemned it publicly, while privately understanding. Fighting enemies, even imaginary ones, was better than facing the emptiness we had created. I discovered something terrible in my research. The FEV wasn't just mutating us, it was sterilizing us. The pregnancy failures weren't miscarriages, they were biological impossibilities. The virus had altered our reproductive systems fundamentally. Even successful births produced sterile offspring. We hadn't just murdered the present, we had murdered our own future. The Enclave would die with this generation, the last humans on Earth, surrounded by the bones of those we had killed to claim it. Richardson's response to the sterility report was to order a new breeding program. mandatory pairings based on genetic compatibility that no longer mattered, fertility treatments that couldn't overcome biological impossibility. He insisted the problem was temporary, that American ingenuity would find a solution. But there was no solution to extinction we had engineered for ourselves. We had won the war against mutation by ensuring nobody would survive to carry any genetics forward. The 5th year brought the collapse of the oil rig's reactor. Without proper mainland resources for maintenance, without the full crew needed for operations, systems started failing catastrophically. The evacuation was chaotic. Thousands of Enclave citizens suddenly forced to the mainland they had avoided. They arrived to find not the promised paradise, but the dying colonies we had hidden from them. The truth broke them faster than any virus could. Many refused to leave the rig even as it burned. They chose drowning or incineration over facing the world we had created. I watched from a vertibird as our last symbol of pre-war America sank into the Pacific, taking with it the fiction that we were rebuilding civilization. We were just another failed Vault experiment, except we had experimented on the entire world. Richardson established a new capital in the ruins of Navarro, our old mainland base. He continued giving orders nobody followed, making plans nobody implemented, declaring victories over enemies that didn't exist. His final cabinet meeting consisted of 3 people, including himself. He promoted me to vice president after Byrd finally succumbed to his brain damage. I accepted, because titles meant nothing in a world without citizens to govern. The animals grew bolder as our numbers dwindled. Deathclaws hunted us through city streets. Rad scorpions claimed entire neighborhoods. Mutant plants grew through our buildings, reclaiming them faster than we could clear them. Nature was taking back the world. But it was a poisoned nature, twisted by our virus into something hostile to all human life. We hadn't saved Earth for humanity. We had transformed it into something that would never support humanity again. Communication with other potential Enclave cells stopped. Chicago went silent. The remnants in DC never responded. If there were other oil rigs or bunkers, they either didn't survive or chose not to answer. We were alone, the last Enclave, possibly the last humans in a world we had murdered. Every radio frequency played only static. Every emergency beacon went unacknowledged. The silence was complete. I began documenting everything. Not the sanitized reports Richardson wanted, but the truth. The names of everyone who died from our virus, as many as I could find in damaged records. The communities we destroyed, the cultures we erased, the future we prevented. Someone needed to know what we had done, even if that someone would never exist. The children stopped being born entirely in year 6. The last Enclave baby, a girl named Sarah, died at 3 months from organ failure our doctors couldn't prevent. Her parents buried her in Shady Sands, in the same cemetery where NCR presidents lay. Richardson gave a speech about temporary setbacks. Nobody attended. We had run out of hope to pretend with. Suicide became so common we stopped investigating them. Bodies would be found in their quarters, in empty buildings, floating in contaminated rivers. Some left notes, most didn't. What was there to say? We had achieved everything we planned and discovered it was exactly the wrong thing to want. Victory and extinction had become the same word. I spent months in the ruins of the Brotherhood of Steel's archives, reading their preserved pre-war documents. They had tried to prevent this. Their entire organization existed to keep dangerous technology from being misused. They had failed, but at least they had tried. We had succeeded in doing exactly what they fought to prevent. We were the catastrophe they had warned against. The followers of the apocalypse had left behind medical journals in their abandoned outposts. Pages and pages documenting their efforts to help everyone, regardless of mutation or appearance. They had treated super mutants, ghouls, humans equally. They had been building a world where genetics didn't determine worth. We had killed them for the crime of compassion. Enclave military discipline collapsed entirely by year 7. Soldiers abandoned their posts, removed their uniforms, wandered the empty cities like ghosts. Some formed small communities based on shared delusion rather than hierarchy. Others went alone into the wasteland, seeking death or meaning, or just an end to the silence. Power armor stood empty in barracks, monuments to strength that meant nothing without purpose. Richardson died in year 8, not from the virus or mutation or violence. He just stopped. Stopped eating, stopped speaking, stopped moving. He sat at his desk for 3 days before anyone noticed he was dead. His final executive order, unsigned, was to begin immediate reconstruction of American values. The paper was blank below that line. He had run out of values to reconstruct. I became the last president of the Enclave by default. There were only a few hundred of us left, scattered across the continent, dying slowly from a world we had poisoned. My first and only presidential act was to rescind the genetic purity requirements. Anyone who survived was human enough, but there was nobody left to accept our expanded definition. We had killed them all. The automated systems finally began failing completely. Robots that had maintained empty cities shut down one by one. Power grids collapsed. Water purification stopped. The infrastructure we had inherited crumbled, and we lacked both the knowledge and numbers to repair it. We were living in the Stone Age with power armor we couldn't maintain and weapons we couldn't reload. I found a group of children, the last generation, playing in the ruins of New Reno. They had created a game where they pretended to be the people who used to live there. One was a merchant, another a gambler, a third a guard. They assigned each other names from terminals they had read, created entire life stories for the dead. When I asked them why, the oldest girl said, "Someone should remember them, even if it's just pretend." That little girl was right. Someone should remember them. So I started collecting their stories. Every terminal entry, every holotape, every journal I could find. The NCR's legislative records showing their debates about ghoul citizenship rights. The Great Khan's oral histories preserved in writing, documenting their struggles and triumphs. The Van Graff's business ledgers detailing trade routes that connected the entire wasteland in commerce. We had destroyed civilizations more complex and humane than our own. The Enclave's population dropped below 100 in Year 9. We gathered in Navarro for what everyone knew was the end. No more pretense of colonization or restoration, just the last humans on Earth, dying from their own success. We held a final vote on whether to continue. It was unanimous. We would document everything until nobody remained to write. Some tried to find meaning in the ending. They created art from the debris of dead cities. They composed music nobody would hear. They wrote poetry about silence and absence. One engineer spent his final months building a monument to the unknown wastelander, a statue of a faceless figure reaching toward a sky that would never answer. He died before completing it, another unfinished gesture in a world of incompletion. I discovered a cache of pre-war children's books in a Boston library, colorful stories about sharing, kindness, diversity being strength, the very values we had rejected as mutations of American ideals. One book showed children of different colors playing together, its pages noting this was good and natural. We had murdered the world because we couldn't accept that lesson. A kindergarten book contained more wisdom than our entire government. The animals continued evolving in response to the FEV contaminated environment. Two-headed creatures became common, then three-headed, then things that shouldn't exist. Plants grew that dissolved flesh on contact. Water developed properties that defied chemistry. We hadn't just poisoned the world, we had fundamentally broken it, creating an ecosystem hostile to DNA itself. Future evolution, if it happened, would follow paths that led away from anything resembling human life. Year 10 brought the blood plague. Our inoculations, breaking down for a decade, finally failed completely. But instead of dying from FEV exposure, we experienced something worse. A slow dissolution of genetic cohesion, blood cells forgetting their function, organs operating independently of each other, bodies becoming collections of competing systems rather than unified organisms. We were being unmade at the cellular level. I watched the last Enclave soldier, a young woman named Patricia, remove her power armor for the final time. She had been born on the oil rig, trained from childhood to reclaim America. Now she stood in the empty streets of San Francisco, looking at the Golden Gate Bridge collapsed in the bay, and asked me, "Sir, what was it all for?" I couldn't answer. There was no answer that justified what we had done. The final Enclave child, a boy named Thomas, died on his 11th birthday. He had never known a world with other people. His entire existence had been among the dying remnants of our civilization, surrounded by evidence of the billions we had killed. His last words were, "I'm glad I won't have to be alone anymore." We burned his body in the ruins of the cathedral, where the Master had once tried to forcibly evolve humanity. Different methods, same result. Extinction through obsession with perfection. I began finding evidence of other survivors we had missed. A sealed bunker in Montana with recent activity. Radio signals too weak to decipher from the Midwest. Possible vault signatures in unexplored regions. But we couldn't investigate. We lacked the resources, the personnel, the will. If others had survived our genocide, they were better off without encountering its perpetrators. Let them believe they were alone rather than know what we had done. The Brotherhood outcasts had been right to separate from lions, Their hidden bunkers, disconnected from the main organization, might have survived if they had sealed themselves in time. The Minutemen's decentralized structure could have left survivors in settlements we had never mapped. Railroad safe houses deep enough underground might have protected synths and humans alike. We would never know. Our virus had been too effective to allow for confirmation. The last Enclave vertibird crashed in year 11. No more fuel, no more maintenance, no more pilots who remembered how to fly. We were trapped on foot in a continental graveyard. Some tried to reach the coast, hoping to find boats to search for other lands. They never returned. Others dug deeper into vaults and bunkers, seeking shelter that might last longer. They found only darkness and death. I discovered the Garden of Eden in Vault 22. Not a geck, but literal gardens, overgrown and mutated, but alive. The vault's experiment with aggressive plant growth had succeeded too well. Vegetation had consumed everything, creating a green tomb. But it was life, twisted and wrong, but undeniably alive. The plants had adapted to the FEV, incorporating it, transforming it into something that could grow. Nature was finding a way forward that didn't include us. The fusion cores began failing. Power armor became statues, laser weapons became clubs, energy cells drained with no way to recharge them. We were reduced to scavenging basic tools from the civilizations we had destroyed. The irony of Enclave citizens using tribal spears and NCR farming implements wasn't lost on anyone. We had become less than those we had considered inferior. Memory became unreliable in the final years. FEV damage to our brains created false recollections, lost days, confused chronologies. I would find journal entries in my own handwriting describing events I couldn't remember. Other survivors reported similar experiences. We were losing ourselves, our history, our crimes to biological dissolution. Perhaps it was mercy. Forgetting might be easier than remembering. I found Richardson's private terminal, still functional in the Navarro command center. His personal logs revealed the truth. He had known the virus would persist, known the environment would become hostile, known we couldn't survive what we were creating, but he had believed future generations would find solutions, that American ingenuity would overcome any obstacle. He had gambled the world on faith in exceptionalism that never existed. The last Enclave scientist, a woman named Chen, who had worked under Curling, spent her final year trying to create an antivirus. Not to save us, we were beyond saving, but to prevent any future civilization from discovering and weaponizing what we had made. She failed. The FEV had evolved beyond our ability to counter it. Her notes ended with an equation proving that human life, as we had defined it, was mathematically impossible in the world we had created. Food became memory. Water became poison. Air became effort. We were dying from existing in the world we had claimed. Some lasted longer through sheer will or genetic lottery, but the end was inevitable. We had engineered our own extinction while trying to prevent everyone else's. The ultimate failure of supremacist ideology, destroying the supreme along with everyone else. I made contact with a vault that had somehow survived, Vault-31, hidden deep enough that our virus hadn't penetrated. They had monitored the surface, knew what we had done, refused all communication except one message. You are not welcome here. You are not human. You are the death of humanity. They were right on all counts. We had defined ourselves out of our own species through our actions. The hallucinations started in year 13. Dead wastelanders walking through empty streets, phantom caravans traveling trade routes, ghost children playing in ruins. At first, I thought it was guilt manifesting as delusion. Then I realized it was our brains trying to populate the emptiness, creating the world that should have existed. We were haunting ourselves with visions of the life we had prevented. Wildlife began avoiding us entirely. Even mutated creatures recognized us as something wrong, something that brought only death. Birds flew around our settlements. Insects died rather than approaching. We had become so toxic that nature itself rejected our presence. The final proof that we didn't belong in any ecosystem, even one we had poisoned. I found a letter from a child to their parents in the ruins of Megaton. Dear Mum and Dad, I know things are hard, but teacher says if we work together, we can build something better. I love you. Dated 3 days before we released the virus. That child died believing in cooperation while we executed competition. They had more wisdom in one letter than we had in our entire civilization. The last Enclave couple attempted to have a child through every medical intervention we had left. The pregnancy lasted 6 months before failing catastrophically. The child was born with DNA so scrambled it couldn't maintain biological cohesion. It dissolved within minutes of birth. The mother died from complications. The father walked into the wasteland and never returned. Love couldn't overcome the sterility we had engineered. By year 14, we numbered less than 20. We gathered in Shady Sands in the NCR council chambers for a final meeting. Not as Enclave leadership, but as the last humans discussing what to do with our remaining time. The consensus was to document everything, leave warnings for any future intelligence that might emerge, and accept our extinction as justice for our crimes. Some wanted to destroy all evidence of the FEV, prevent future civilizations from repeating our mistake. Others argued the knowledge needed to survive, as warning if nothing else. We compromised by hiding the technical data while documenting the consequences extensively. Let them know what we did but not how to replicate it. Let our extinction be education rather than instruction. I walked through Vault City one last time. They had built a functioning democracy from Vault-Tec's authoritarianism. They had welcomed outsiders despite their fears. They had chosen inclusion over isolation. Everything we could have been if we hadn't chosen purity over humanity. Their empty streets judged us more harshly than any tribunal could. The documents revealed something worse. Alternative plans, rejected but seriously considered. Biological weapons deployment against China before nuclear exchange. Domestic population reduction to preserve resources. Forced genetic modification programs. FEV Curling-13 wasn't our first attempt at genocide. It was just our most successful. We had always been monsters waiting for an opportunity to show our true nature. Every morning, I walk through empty San Francisco. The automated trams still run their routes, announcing stops to passengers who dissolved 15 years ago. Shop windows display products nobody will buy. Traffic lights change for cars that will never come. The city maintains itself for a civilization we erased. Sometimes I pretend there are others, that I'll turn a corner and find a survivor. But the only footprints in the dust are mine. I discovered a synth in a sealed basement yesterday. Institute technology, more advanced than anything we had. It looked human, acted human, had memories of being human. But our virus hadn't affected it. Artificial DNA, immune to FEV. It had been hiding for 15 years, waiting for the Enclave to leave so it could emerge safely. When it saw me, it said, "You're still here." "Why are you still here?" I couldn't answer. Why am I still here? The synth told me about the Institute before it departed. Underground scientists in the Commonwealth, creating artificial humans. They might have survived in their sealed environment. The virus couldn't penetrate that deep. Their synthetic biology wouldn't be affected. An entire civilization of artificial beings inheriting the world because we had murdered the natural ones. The irony would be beautiful if it weren't so damning. West-Tech's headquarters contained records we had never accessed. The original FEV research, designed to create super soldiers to protect America, we had perverted protection into extermination. The scientists' notes showed they had considered the virus's potential for genocide and explicitly rejected it as inhuman. We had taken their rejected evil and called it patriotism. We had become what even weapons manufacturers considered too extreme. I've started seeing them during the day now. Not hallucinations, but memories so vivid they feel real. A merchant in the hub explaining trade routes to his daughter. A farmer in Modoc teaching his son about soil rotation. A doctor in Vault City treating a patient regardless of their ability to pay. All the small human moments we had erased in the name of grand ideology. They don't accuse, they just exist in my memory. Reminders of what the world had been building before we ended it. The children haunt me most. Not because they suffered, though they did, but because they had been learning to be better than their parents. Schools throughout the NCR taught cooperation between humans and mutants. The Abbey preserved knowledge without discrimination. The followers educated anyone willing to learn. A generation was growing up without the prejudices that had caused the Great War. We killed them for not being prejudiced enough. I found Vault 21, filled with gambling equipment, but empty of life. Its experiment had been resolving conflicts through chance rather than violence. It had worked. The dwellers had lived in peace for over a century, settling every dispute with dice and cards. They had emerged, traded with the wasteland, shown that human nature could be changed. We had killed them for changing in the wrong direction, toward chance instead of purity. The think tank at Big Mountain might have survived. Their brain jars and personality modules wouldn't be affected by biological weapons, but their systems needed maintenance. Their facilities required power. Without human support, they would have degraded into madness or shut down. Another pocket of genius we had eliminated through secondary effects. We hadn't just killed people, we had killed potential. Every Enclave citizen who died in those final years understood what we had done. The denial collapsed with our biology. Soldiers confessed to crimes they had celebrated. Scientists admitted to knowing the consequences they had ignored. Citizens acknowledged the lies they had chosen to believe. We all died knowing we were guilty. Hell isn't fire and brimstone. It's understanding what you've done with no way to undo it. I tried to find other vaults for years, followed every signal, checked every location mentioned in records. Most were tombs, their experiments having failed long ago, or their doors opened after we released the virus. But some remained sealed, their inhabitants choosing isolation over investigation. They knew something had happened. They chose not to know what. I left warnings at their doors. Don't emerge. The world is poison. We made it poison. Stay safe. Stay human. The Master had been right about one thing. Humanity needed to evolve to survive the wasteland. He had chosen forced physical evolution through FEV. We had chosen forced extinction through the same virus. Both approaches assumed humanity couldn't adapt naturally. Both were wrong. The wasteland communities had been evolving socially, creating inclusive societies that transcended genetic differences. Natural evolution, not of bodies but of minds. We had killed it because we couldn't control it. Jacobstown proved cooperation was possible. Marcus the super mutant had created a community where mutants and humans lived peacefully. They had overcome centuries of conflict through simple coexistence. Dr. Henry had been developing treatments to help rather than harm. They had been solving the problems we insisted required genocide. We had murdered the solution while implementing the problem. I've read every terminal in every settlement. Junktown's mayor trying to maintain law through fairness rather than force. Gecko's nuclear plant operated jointly by ghouls and humans. Broken Hill's mining ore through integrated labor. The den's criminals maintaining honor among thieves. Even the worst of the wasteland had been building social structures, creating order from chaos. We had been the chaos that ended their order. The Legion would have been our enemy, but even they had been building something. Brutal, primitive, but undeniably human. They had integrated 86 tribes through conquest and culture. They had created identity from disparity. Their methods were monstrous, but they had been trying to unite humanity. We had been trying to eliminate it. Between Caesar and Richardson, Caesar had been the humanist. Radiation levels are dropping in some places. The background radiation that defined the wasteland for 2 centuries is fading, but it doesn't matter. The FEV has bonded with the remaining radiation, creating new compounds that prevent life from stabilizing. Any organism that adapts to current conditions can't survive when those conditions change. We've created evolutionary dead ends in every direction. Life might continue, but it won't be life as Earth has ever known it. I found a recording from Navarro, dated just before the virus release. A soldier talking to his wife about their future on the mainland. They were planning a house, children, a garden. He promised her they would build paradise together. She died in the colonization. He died from mutation. Their paradise became my hell. Every Enclave dream had become a wasteland nightmare. The robots judge us now. Not consciously, they're just machines. But their programming assumes human presence. Every day they search for people to serve, customers to help, citizens to protect. They find only me, and I'm dying too slowly to satisfy their protocols. Some have started glitching, their routines corrupted by the absence of purpose. Even our machines are failing from the world we created. Mirelurks have inherited the coasts. Whatever they're becoming, it's not anything from Earth's past. The FEV has accelerated their evolution in directions that shouldn't exist. They're developing tools, communication, possibly intelligence. If they achieve civilization, it will be one that emerged from humanity's suicide. We didn't pass the torch. We dropped it into poison and let whatever survived carry it forward. The boomers at Nellis might have had the right idea. Total isolation, shooting at anyone who approached. If they had stayed sealed during the viral release, if their hangar had been airtight, if they had enough supplies to last decades, they might have survived. But they would have needed to trade eventually. Even xenophobia requires contact to sustain itself. We had proven that definitively. I've documented every Enclave citizen I can remember. Their names, their roles, their crimes. Not for history, there won't be historians. But because someone should admit they existed. We were people before we became monsters. We had families, friends, dreams that didn't require genocide. Somewhere in our pursuit of purity, we forgot we were human. The virus didn't kill our humanity. We did that ourselves. Weather patterns are changing. Storms that shouldn't exist, carrying particles that shouldn't combine. The FEV has reached the upper atmosphere, affecting pressure systems, altering precipitation. It's raining poison in places that haven't seen rain since the bombs. The water cycle itself has become hostile to life. We've broken the planet's ability to heal itself. I found the platinum chip in the ruins of New Vegas, the key to House's missile defense system, to his dreams of autocratic paradise. It's worthless now. No House to use it, no Vegas to protect, no future to secure. But I carry it anyway, a reminder that everyone had plans, dreams, visions of tomorrow. We had ended all tomorrows in favor of our yesterday. The soil samples I've analyzed show fundamental changes to bacterial composition. Microorganisms essential for decomposition and nutrient cycling have been altered beyond recognition. Dead things don't rot properly anymore. They dissolve into compounds that poison the ground further. We've created a world where even death doesn't work correctly. The natural cycle broken by our unnatural intervention. At night, I dream of the chosen ones succeeding, breaking into the oil rig, convincing Curling that wastelanders were human, turning our virus against us, destroying everything we had built. In my dreams, this is tragedy. When I wake, I know it would have been salvation. They would have saved the world by destroying us. We destroyed the world by saving ourselves. The synth returned today with others, a small group, artificial humans immune to our virus. They're documenting the ruins, preserving the history we tried to erase. They don't speak to me much. What would be the point? But they're allowing me to help, to point them toward records and stories. The Wastelanders' legacy will survive through artificial beings we would have destroyed for being impure. The future belongs to the synthetic because we murdered the organic. I've been experimenting with the remaining FEV samples, trying to understand what we've created. It's not just a virus anymore. It's become something between biological and chemical, capable of altering matter at the molecular level. It doesn't just kill, it unmakes, breaks down the building blocks of life into components that can't rebuild. We've created entropy incarnate, dissolution as a force of nature. The old world's monuments still stand. The Lincoln Memorial, empty of meaning. The Washington Monument pointing at nothing. Mount Rushmore, faces of leaders who would weep at what America became. We had wrapped ourselves in these symbols while betraying everything they represented. Freedom became control. Democracy became autocracy. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness became death, purity, and the pursuit of extinction. 3 Mile Island is still radioactive, but differently now. The radiation interacts with the FEV to create energy signatures that shouldn't exist. It's becoming something new, neither nuclear nor biological, but both and neither. A new form of contamination born from our attempt to clean the world. We've added a new category of disaster to Earth's catalogue of horrors. Every Vault experiment seems rational compared to what we did. Vault 11's voting for sacrifice, Vault 12's radiation exposure, even Vault 75's genetic refinement through murder. They were all monstrous but limited, contained, ultimately finite in their harm. We had taken Vault-Tec's evil and made it global, permanent, infinite. We had out-monstered the monsters. The birds that survived have forgotten how to sing. They make sounds that aren't quite chirps, aren't quite screams. Communication evolved for a world that no longer exists. They fly in patterns that don't match any migration, searching for something they'll never find. Even animal instinct has been corrupted by what we've done. Nature itself has forgotten how to be natural. I'm dying now. Finally, the blood plague has reached its terminal phase. My cells are forgetting how to be cells. My organs forgetting their functions. I'm dissolving like the Wastelanders did, just slower, with more time to contemplate the justice of it. The last human dying the way we killed humanity. There's poetry in that, the kind of poetry that's written in screams. Before the end, I need to say this clearly. We were wrong, not mistaken, not misguided, not tragically flawed. Wrong, evil, monstrous. We committed the greatest crime possible, the murder of future itself. We destroyed diversity in the name of purity. We ended possibility in the name of preservation. We killed tomorrow to protect a yesterday that never actually existed. The Enclave's legacy isn't American restoration. It's the proof that ideology pursued to its logical extreme becomes genocide. That purity is another word for death. That supremacy ultimately means standing supreme over nothing. We won everything we wanted and lost everything that mattered. We achieved our goals and erased our species. We succeeded in our failure. If anyone ever finds these records, if any intelligence capable of understanding emerges from the poison we've made of Earth, know this. Humanity could have been beautiful. The wasteland was healing. People were building something better from the ashes of the old world. They were learning, growing, becoming more than their ancestors had been. They were choosing cooperation over competition, Diversity over purity, future over past. We stopped them. The Enclave, the self-proclaimed heirs of America, the pure humans, the guardians of democracy. We stopped the future because it didn't match our past. We ended evolution because we couldn't control its direction. We murdered hope because it wore genes we didn't recognize. We were the Great War's final casualty and its ultimate victory. We were humanity's suicide note written in other people's blood. My name was Marcus Whitfield. I was human once. I became a monster in the name of humanity. I die as the last witness to the greatest crime ever committed. The earth is silent now. No birds sing, no children laugh. No merchants trade. No farmers plant. No soldiers march. No leaders lead. No followers follow. There is only the wind through empty cities and the slow dissolution of everything we claim to protect. Let this be our epitaph. Here lies the Enclave. They won everything and everyone lost.